The air inside the monastery walls holds a damp chill, carrying the faint scent of melting tallow and aged parchment. It's the year 1347, somewhere in the quiet countryside of France, and a solitary scribe bends over a slanted wooden desk. The silence of the stone room breaks only through the wet, rhythmic scratching of a raven feather quill dragging against a sheet of rough vellum. We watch the candlelight flicker and dance, casting long, wavering shadows across the uneven floorboards and up the towering walls. The scribe hesitates, his wrist cramping, muscles pulling tight beneath the skin as he maneuvers the delicate instrument. He sweeps his hand across the page, and the side of his palm catches the fresh, glistening ink. A dark smudge smears across the holy text, ruining hours of meticulous, back-breaking labour. A frustrated sigh escapes his lips, echoing up into the vaulted ceiling and fading into the dark corners of the room. He shakes his hand, feeling the dull ache spreading from his knuckles all the way up to his elbow. The abbot watches from the arched doorway, his eyes narrowing with a quiet, persistent disapproval that hangs in the cold air. The young monk belongs to a silent minority, possessing an instinctual trait that the world around him doesn't understand and won't accommodate. We can leave this medieval room behind and step into a bustling coffee shop in the present day, surrounded by the hum of espresso machines and the clatter of ceramic cups. Count the people sitting at the tables sipping their drinks, typing on their glowing screens, and turning the pages of their books. 1 out of every 10 people in that bright modern room shares the exact same biological trait as the frustrated monk from the 14th century. It's an invisible thread connecting the present moment to the distant, shadowy past. Look back through the vast, sprawling archives of recorded history, from the sun-drenched marble temples of ancient Greece to the neon-lit intersections of modern Japan. We find this trait surviving in the cobblestone streets of medieval Europe and persisting through the vibrant neighbourhoods of contemporary Brazil. The mathematics of this phenomenon remain stubborn and unchanging, locked forever at a steady 10% of the human population. It wanders slightly across different eras, fluctuating between 9 and 12%, but it always settles back to that singular, unyielding baseline. Nature pushes humanity through devastating ice ages, widespread famines, and catastrophic storms, acting as a ruthless editor of our genetic code. About 900,000 years ago, evolutionary pressures nearly wiped our species off the face of the earth, leaving only a tiny handful of ancestors clinging to survival in the brush. Yet, through all the brutal bottlenecks and the relentless culling of traits that offer no immediate benefit, this specific variant survived the forge of time. Our ancestors gave it names rooted in fear and suspicion, shaping their languages around a misunderstanding of human biology. The Latin tongue gave us the word sinister, a term meant to describe the left side, which eventually morphed into a synonym for evil, malice, and looming danger. The French language offered the word gauche, translating to awkward or clumsy, painting a picture of a person stumbling through a world built with someone else in mind. Across vast, sweeping deserts, Arabic traditions linked the left hand to unclean associations, reserving it for tasks meant to stay hidden away in the shadows of daily life. Even in the school classrooms of the 1960s and 1970s, children faced the sting of physical punishment just for holding a pencil. Their knuckles met the strike of wooden rulers, their teachers trying to force a change in their natural neurological wiring. We face a strange and beautiful paradox here, hiding just beneath the surface of our everyday interactions. If the natural world operates without mercy, erasing everything that doesn't provide a clear advantage, why does it refuse to erase this one specific difference? Why does evolution protect a trait that seems to invite nothing but hardship, physical inconvenience, and societal persecution? The answer hides inside the architecture of the human mind, waiting for us to unravel its ancient secrets. Step away from the rigid boundaries of the past and enter a quiet, sterile room filled with soft light. The walls wear a coat of muted grey paint, and a steady, rhythmic hum radiates from the air vents above. We picture the human brain as a machine of endless complexity, defying the simple categories society tries to force upon it. The world insists on a binary assumption, demanding that every person fit neatly into a box labelled right or a box labelled left. It's a convenient illusion, a comforting lie we tell ourselves to make sense of the chaos of human biology. The reality resembles a smooth, unbroken gradient, a sliding scale that shifts and changes with every individual mind. Listen to the soft, rhythmic shuffling of a deck of cards across a green felt table. The paper slides against paper, dealt with effortless precision by a left hand moving through the air. Then, hear the sharp, crisp sound of metal scissors slicing through thick construction paper, wielded by a right hand. This is the soundtrack of cross-dominance, a reality that affects 20 to 30% of the human population. These individuals prefer different hands for different tasks, throwing a ball with one arm while threading a needle with the other. They live in a state of neurological compromise, adapting their physical movements to the tools available in their immediate environment. We must separate instinctive hand preference from objective hand skill, two concepts often tangled together in observation. A child might learn to write with their right hand through years of forced repetition, building muscle memory through sheer exhausting practice. The skill exists in the right hand, but the brain remains wired in its original natural configuration. The forced switching creates a mask, hiding the true neurology beneath a layer of societal compliance and learned behavior. True ambidexterity, the equal and perfect dominance of both sides, exists in only 1 to 2% of the population. It's a rare phenomenon, a biological anomaly that fascinates researchers and neurologists studying the limits of human coordination. Yet, this perfect balance comes with its own hidden costs inside the architecture of the mind. Studies reveal that true ambidexterity correlates with slightly higher rates of learning difficulties, pointing to processing inefficiencies within the neural pathways. The brain struggles to divide the labor, expending extra energy to maintain the symmetry of movement across both hemispheres. Tell me, softly in the comments below, from what quiet corner of the world are you listening to this, and what time is it there right now? As you listen to the steady rhythm of my voice, think about your own hands resting beside you. If handedness isn't a simple switch, if it refuses to conform to a binary rule, how do we even begin to measure the truth of a human mind? The air in the room feels cool against the skin, and the light from the overhead fixtures casts no shadows. You watch the hands moving across the table, the muscles contracting and releasing with mechanical grace. The fingertips trace the edges of the cards, feeling the microscopic imperfections in the cardboard texture. The metal blades of the scissors gleam under the fluorescent bulbs, reflecting a distorted image of the surrounding space. The friction of the steel against the paper creates a resonance that travels up the arm and into the jaw. It's a symphony of microscopic vibrations, a testament to the intricate connection between thought and physical action. We observe the subtle hesitations, the micro-adjustments the fingers make as they navigate the constraints of the physical world. The journey into the left-handed mind requires us to discard everything we thought we knew about the symmetry of the body. The environment shifts, taking us into the heart of a quiet laboratory in the 1970s. A large analog clock hangs on the wall, its second hand ticking forward with a slow, methodical rhythm. The scent of ozone and aging paper fills the space, mixing with the faint aroma of fresh graphite. A researcher sits at a metal desk holding a wooden pencil, checking off small boxes on a crisp white form. This piece of paper holds the power to decode the gradient of human asymmetry. It's the Edinburgh Handedness Inventory, developed by a scientist named R.C. Oldfield, designed to strip away the illusions of the binary world. The test doesn't ask a single, sweeping question about your identity. It asks you to perform 10 specific mundane activities. Listen to the sudden scrape and hiss of striking a wooden match against a rough strip of phosphorus. Hear the rhythmic, sweeping sound of a straw broom pushing dust across a hardwood floor. Feel the friction of cardboard as fingers pry open the tight lid of a small storage box. The inventory measures the grip on a pair of scissors, the angle of a toothbrush against the gums, and the balance of a knife used without a fork. It watches how you hold a spoon, how you throw a stone, and how you drag a pen across a page. Each answer translates into a number, feeding into a mathematical formula that reveals the hidden landscape of the brain. The numerical score stretches across a wide spectrum, ranging from -100 on the extreme left to +100 on the extreme right. A score of absolute 0 represents a person standing in the rare, perfectly balanced center of ambidexterity. When scientists plot these scores on a graph, they don't see two isolated mountains representing left and right. Instead, they witness a continuous rolling distribution, a vast hill leaning heavily toward the right side of the scale, clustering between +50 and +100. But the true mystery lies in the shape of the remaining data. The graph forms a long, sweeping tail trailing off into the leftward numbers, stretching out into the negative territory. It's a visual representation of resistance, a mathematical shadow cast by the 10% of humanity that refuses to conform. The pencil scratches against the paper, marking another score, adding another data point to the infinite catalogue of human variants. We realize that handedness isn't a single switch buried in the genetic code. It's a complex symphony of biology and environment. The brain conducts this symphony in the dark, assigning tasks to different fingers, wrists, and joints without our conscious permission. We go through our days blindly trusting this internal division of labour, never stopping to question the mechanics of our own movements. But as the clock ticks on the laboratory wall, a deeper question emerges from the silence. Is the hand the only asymmetrical part of us, or does the rabbit hole go further down into the body? Close your eyes and turn your focus inward, beginning a slow, physical scan of your own resting body. Feel the weight of your feet pressing against the floor, the subtle tension in your ankles adjusting to the pull of gravity. Imagine standing on a grassy field, waiting for a ball to roll toward you, preparing to strike it with a sudden kick. 80% of the people walking the earth will instinctively plant their left foot and swing with their right. Footedness reveals the first hidden layer of asymmetry, proving that the brain's bias extends far beyond the reach of the fingers. Now, lift your hands and imagine holding a heavy brass telescope, pressing the cold metal rim against your face to look at the stars. Or picture the viewfinder of a vintage camera, the click of the shutter echoing in your mind as you frame a photograph. You naturally bring the lens to one specific eye, leaving the other open to the periphery or squeezed shut in concentration. Eyedness operates on its own independent logic, showing less correlation to the hands than we might expect. Then, move your attention to the side of your head, focusing on the intricate curves of your ear. Hear the muffled, distant sound of an ear pressed flat against a heavy wooden door, listening to a faint heartbeat on the other side. Think of the instinctive motion of raising a telephone receiver to catch the voice of a loved one. Earedness represents the weakest asymmetry of them all, yet it still whispers secrets about the wiring of the cortex. All these physical preferences act as signposts, pointing inward toward the true command center, the lateralization of the human brain. The organ inside your skull divides its responsibilities, splitting the labor of existence between two distinct hemispheres. For the right-handed majority, the left hemisphere dominates the complex task of processing language and speech. But when we look at the 10%, the left-handers, the rules of biology begin to fracture and bend. 70% of left-handers still process language in the left hemisphere, mirroring the internal structure of their right-handed peers. However, 15% flip the script completely, hosting their language centers in the right hemisphere of the brain. The final 15% spread the workload across the middle, distributing language evenly across both halves of the mind. This invisible internal rebellion creates a profound flexibility, a unique neurological blueprint hidden beneath the bone. Society attempts to crush this flexibility, imposing rules and expectations that alter the visible statistics of the world. Under the weight of intense social pressure, visible left-handedness drops to a mere 5 or 6% of the population. But when a culture opens its doors to acceptance, the number naturally rises and stabilizes at 12 or 13%. If the brain divides the labor of existence so uniquely, creating this resilient 10%, how far back in time does this neurological rebellion go? The sterile air of the laboratory fades, replaced by the dry, baking heat of an ancient, sun-drenched excavation site. Dust coats the skin, clinging to the sweat on the brow of an archaeologist kneeling in the dirt. We journey back in time, stepping across the threshold of millions of years into the prehistoric stillness of the savannah. The sound of the wind sweeping through the tall grass breaks as a sharp, rhythmic clack echoes across the landscape. One heavy stone strikes another with calculated precision, sending a shower of flint dust falling to the ground. Sharp edges flake away from the core, revealing a crude but deadly blade meant for survival in a hostile world. In the 1980s, researchers brought these ancient stones into the light, placing them under the scrutiny of systematic analysis. They measured the flaking angles, traced the impact points, and reconstructed the specific motions of the hands that shaped them. The rocks told a story of overwhelming consistency, a mathematical pattern preserved in the fossil record. When examining tools from the past 200,000 years, the scientists discovered an undeniable truth written in the stone. 90% of the artifacts display the unmistakable markers of right-handed manufacturing. The strikes came from a specific angle, driven by the dominant right arm of our distant ancestors. But mixed within the debris, hiding in the shadows of the excavation trenches, the remaining 10% tell a different tale. These tools show the reversed impact points, the exact mirror image of the standard manufacturing process. The 10% ratio wasn't a modern invention. It existed before the concept of civilization ever took root. The evidence goes deeper, pulling us further into the abyss of deep time. Researchers placed 300,000-year-old tools from Africa under the lens of powerful microscopes. They searched the microscopic wear patterns, the tiny scratches and grooves left behind by constant repetitive use. The patterns confirmed the same division, the same unyielding mathematical split of 90 to 10. They travelled to Europe, unearthing 150,000-year-old tools from the dark, cold sites of the Neanderthals. The rocks from the frozen north echoed the rocks from the blistering south, bearing the identical signature of human asymmetry. Right-hand dominance isn't merely a human trait, it belongs to the broader lineage of the hominins. It's a fundamental characteristic of our genus, hardwired into the evolutionary trajectory of our ancestors, long before we walked alone. We see the hands that shaped the stone, the phantom fingers gripping the flint in the prehistoric dawn. But rocks can only show us the echoes of movement, the shadows of the toolmakers. Can we get closer to the source of the mystery, closer to the physical bodies themselves? The heat of the African sun gives way to the biting, relentless cold of Ice Age Europe. Freezing winds howl outside the entrance of a shallow cave, carrying the scent of pine needles and approaching snow. Inside, a family of Neanderthals sits huddled around a crackling hearth, the firelight casting a warm, orange glow on their rugged faces. The flames spit and pop as grease drips from the roasting meat into the hot embers below. The air tastes of wood smoke, ash, and the metallic tang of fresh blood. Survival in this brutal environment demands a constant intake of calories, turning every meal into a mechanical process. Watch the figures in the firelight as they eat, holding thick strips of tough, dried meat between their front teeth. They pull the meat tight, creating tension, and bring a sharp flint blade up to their faces to cut off a manageable bite. Listen to the visceral, terrifying sound of the stone blade slicing through the fibrous muscle just millimeters from the lips. Sometimes the blade slips through the meat too quickly, passing through the flesh and striking the front teeth. The stone drags across the enamel, leaving a microscopic scrape, a permanent groove etched into the hardest substance in the human body. Over a lifetime of meals, these accidental scratches accumulate, forming a dense, chaotic network of lines on the surface of the teeth. Thousands of years later, scientists extract these fossilized skulls from the permafrost, placing the teeth under high-powered magnification. The scratches become an accidental barcode, a fossilized record of handedness preserved perfectly for tens of thousands of years. The angle of the scratch reveals the trajectory of the blade, exposing the dominant hand of the individual who held it. Right-handed cutting leaves diagonal lines slanting in one specific direction across the surface of the enamel. Left-handed cutting produces the exact opposite pattern, leaving lines that intersect the standard angle like a mirror image. The analysis of Neanderthal teeth gathered from multiple excavation sites across Europe and Western Asia brings the data into sharp focus. The researchers count the angles, sort the skulls, and run the calculations through their modern computers. The result strikes them with an eerie, familiar precision. The exact same ratio emerges from the bones. 90% of the Neanderthals held the blade in their right hand, leaving the standard rightward slant on their teeth. 10% held the blade in their left, marking their enamel with the signature of the minority. The mathematics of the monastery in 1347 mirror the mathematics of the Ice Age hearth perfectly. The teeth tell us how our extinct cousins survived the brutal winters, how they processed their food and fed their families. But while the bones show us how they lived and fought against the elements, the walls of the earth tell us how they dreamt. We leave the hearth behind and descend into complete suffocating darkness, venturing deep into the limestone caverns of Europe. The damp smell of wet rock fills the lungs, and the temperature drops to a steady, eternal chill. A single torch flares to life, illuminating the jagged sweeping walls of El Castillo in Spain, Chauvet in France, and Pechmerle in the Dordogne. The deep, echoing acoustics of the cave amplify the sound of our footsteps, making the space feel vast and sacred. We stand in the ancient cathedrals of the Paleolithic era, looking at art created 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. The light flickers across the stone, revealing dozens of ghostly silhouettes scattered across the rock face. These are hand stencils, negative images left behind by the earliest artists of our species. Picture the process of their creation in the dim light of the ancient world. The artist steps up to the wall, holding a hollow bone tube filled with crushed red ochre and charcoal pigment. They place one hand flat against the cold, uneven surface of the rock, spreading their fingers wide to claim the space. Listen to the breathy, airy sound of the artist blowing forcefully through the bone tube. The pigment sprays out in a fine mist, settling onto the rock and outlining the edges of the fingers in vibrant red and black. To achieve a crisp, perfect silhouette, the artist requires immense breath control and precise aiming of the bone tube. Naturally, they hold the delicate, crucial spraying instrument in their dominant hand, relying on their greatest motor skill. The hand pressed flat against the wall, acting as the passive stencil, is almost always the non-dominant hand. By cataloguing thousands of these ancient stencils across multiple cave systems, researchers can read the handedness of the ghosts. They measure the thumb angles, the finger lengths, and the proportions to determine which hand rests on the stone. The vast majority of the silhouettes are left hands, meaning right-handed artists blew the pigment over them. But once again, the statistical anchor of humanity reveals itself in the darkness of the subterranean galleries. About 10% of the stencils scattered across the walls are clearly right hands, pressed flat by left-handed artists holding the bone tube in their left. The artists of the 10% stood in the same caves, breathing the same air, leaving their mark on eternity. The ratio survived the wild predators, the freezing temperatures, and the brutal conditions of the Paleolithic landscape. It wove itself into the fabric of early human expression, a silent witness to the dawn of creativity. But as humanity climbed out of the caves and began to build cities, the rules of survival shifted drastically. This 10% ratio survived the wild, but how did it survive the dawn of civilization and the crushing weight of its new laws? The chaotic freedom of the deep caves fades into the rigid geometric control of the early human empires. The irregular limestone walls transform into perfectly cut blocks of sandstone, rising toward the sun in the shape of monumental pyramids. The air grows thick with the scent of burning incense, and the rustle of dry papyrus echoes through the halls of administration. We enter a world obsessed with order, hierarchy, and the divine right of kings to dictate the lives of their subjects. In ancient Egypt, the artists paint their murals with strict, unyielding rules governing the depiction of the human form. Look closely at the figures adorning the tombs and temples of the pharaohs. The artists always depict the proper, righteous figures, the gods, the kings, and the nobility, as strictly right-handed. They hold their scepters, weapons, and offerings, with the hand sanctioned by the divine order of the universe. But when the painters depict enemies, captured foreigners, or chaotic demons, they flip the orientation entirely. They paint these figures as left-handed, using the asymmetry of the body to mark them as the dangerous, untrustworthy other. This architecture of prejudice didn't stay confined to the banks of the Nile. It spread across the Mediterranean Sea. The Greeks and Romans embedded this bias directly into the foundation of their languages, shaping the way people thought for centuries. The heavy, authoritarian thud of a Roman brass seal pressing into hot red wax finalizes the decrees of the Senate. The Latin language gives us the word dexter, meant to describe the right side, but also meaning skillful, adroit, and favourable. In contrast, the word sinister belongs to the left, carrying the heavy baggage of threat, evil, and impending doom. Greek and Roman authors filled their scrolls with philosophical treatises viewing left-handedness as a physical deformity, a weakness of the blood. They wrote that a left-handed child brought bad luck to the household, an omen of misfortune sent by angry gods. In the temples, making an oath or an offering with the left hand constituted a supreme act of blasphemy. Even in the streets, offering a left-handed greeting to a passing neighbour registered as a deliberate, calculated insult. Society built a massive, invisible cage of language and religion, designed to outlaw the left hand from public life. The stigma seeped into every interaction, forcing the 10% to hide their nature under the threat of social exile. The pressure to conform mounted, driving the trait into the shadows, but the numbers refused to break. Language and religion outlawed the left hand, but the empires of antiquity relied on more than just words and prayers to survive. In matters of life and death, on the blood-soaked fields of war, could armies afford to reject the power of the 10%? The smell of papyrus burns away, replaced by the choking dust and the sharp, metallic scent of copper and sweat. We stand on the edge of a sunlit battlefield, feeling the ground tremble beneath our feet. Listen to the rhythmic, terrifying marching of a Roman legion, thousands of hobnailed sandals striking the earth in perfect unison. The military machine of Rome relies on absolute conformity, turning individual men into a single, impenetrable wall of wood and steel. The 10% ratio persists in classical antiquity, visible in the archaeological remains of tools and amphitheatres, but the legion demands uniformity. Roman legionaries carried their massive curved shields on their left arms, holding their short swords in their right hands. This tactical configuration wasn't a choice. It was an absolute necessity for the survival of the shield wall formation. Each man's shield protected his own body and overlapped to cover the exposed right side of the man standing next to him. A left-handed soldier standing in the line would carry his shield on the right, breaking the interlocking defence. He would bump elbows with his neighbour, creating a fatal gap in the wall where an enemy spear could easily penetrate. In the rigid formations of the infantry, left-handers represented a massive liability, a disruption to the geometry of war. But the Roman generals, pragmatic and ruthless in their pursuit of victory, didn't simply discard the 10%. Archaeological evidence reveals that armies funneled left-handers into specialised highly lethal roles outside the main battle line. They became skirmishers, scouts, and cavalrymen, utilising their unpredictable angles of attack to break the enemy's rhythm. Smiths forged specialised left-handed swords and shields, finding a place for the minority in the chaos of open combat. The true value of the left-hander showed itself most vividly in the brutal roaring arenas of the gladiators. The scrape of a specialised leather arm guard in the sand echoes as a fighter steps into the sunlight. Gladiators represented massive financial investments, trained for years to entertain the crowds with their lethal skills. In the arena, the rules of the shield wall disappeared, replaced by the dynamics of single combat. Historical records and artistic depictions show gladiators utilising reversed grips, wielding their weapons in their left hands to disorient their opponents. The training schools recognised the advantage, leaving behind practice marks and specialised equipment tailored for the left-handed fighters. The right-handed gladiators spent their lives training against other right-handers, building muscle memory for specific blocks and parries. When a left-hander stepped onto the sand, the angles of attack completely inverted, rendering the standard defences useless. The left-hander's power hand struck from the blind side, finding the gaps in the armour before the brain could react. If society punished it but the battlefield prized it, what was nature doing inside the DNA to keep creating it? The roar of the gladiatorial arena dissolves into the quiet, controlled environment of a modern genetics laboratory. The air hums with the sound of spinning centrifuges, and the mechanical click of micropipettes echoes against the white walls. We leave the realm of history and enter the microscopic world of inheritance, searching for the blueprint of human asymmetry. For decades, scientists believed they could solve the mystery by tracking the trait through the branches of family trees. Family clustering implies a strong mechanism of inheritance, suggesting that left-handedness passes from parent to child like eye colour. But biology refuses to provide a simple answer, turning the process into a complex game of chance. Listen to the soft, rhythmic clicking of dice rolling across a green felt table, representing nature's gamble with the genetic code. When two right-handed parents have a child, the odds of that child being left-handed stand at a steady 9%. The dice roll, the numbers fall, and the overwhelming majority of the time the child matches the parents. But what happens when the parents themselves belong to the 10%? If two left-handed parents have a child, the odds of producing a left-handed baby rise, but they don't reach certainty. The probability stops at 26%, leaving a massive 74% chance that their child will be right-handed. These numbers completely destroy the idea of a simple, Mendelian recessive gene, the kind that determines whether a child has blue eyes. If left-handedness operated on those simple rules, two left-handed parents would produce left-handed children 100% of the time. To untangle this web, researchers turned their attention to the ultimate genetic experiment, the study of twins. Identical twins share 100% of their DNA, developing from the exact same fertilized egg. Fraternal twins share only 50%, no more genetically similar than ordinary siblings born years apart. The scientists theorized that if genes controlled handedness entirely, identical twins would always favor the same hand. The results of the twin studies sent shockwaves through the scientific community, deepening the mystery even further. Identical twins match their handedness 76% of the time, while fraternal twins match 72% of the time. The gap between the two groups is incredibly small, proving that DNA alone doesn't hold the steering wheel. The most staggering statistic of all emerges from the identical twins who defy their own mirrored biology. 24% of identical twins carrying the exact same sequence of genetic code do not match their handedness at all. One reaches for a pencil with the right hand, while the other reaches with the left. If identical twins with identical DNA can have different handedness, the secret isn't just in the code. The secret hides in the complex, mysterious reading of the code. The physical laboratory fades as we dive into the vast, dizzying landscape of the human genome. It's a digital universe of endless complexity, a sprawling city of proteins and molecules stretching out into the dark. Listen to the rapid, continuous clicking of a keyboard and the digital scrolling of endless genetic sequences on a glowing monitor. The screen illuminates a dark room, casting a pale blue light across the face of a researcher staring at the data. In the year 2019, scientists launched a massive, unprecedented investigation into the architecture of our DNA. They gathered the genetic data of 400,000 people, feeding the information into powerful supercomputers. They searched for the specific sequences, the tiny variations in the code that might explain the origins of left-handedness. They expected to find a master gene, a clear and undeniable switch that flipped the brain's orientation. Instead, the computer spat out a fractured, fragmented map consisting of dozens of tiny, almost imperceptible influences. The strongest genetic variant they discovered increases the odds of being left-handed by a mere 1.5%. When the researchers combined all the identified variants together, they found that genetics explain less than 1% of the total variation. The code provides a gentle nudge, a microscopic whisper, but it doesn't dictate the final outcome of the body. They isolated a gene called LRRTM1, located on chromosome 2, known for its role in establishing brain asymmetry. This gene carries a weak statistical link to schizophrenia, hinting at the profound neurological stakes involved in balancing the hemispheres. They found another gene called PCSK6, heavily involved in the early left-right asymmetry of the developing embryo. Mutations in this gene can lead to a condition called situs inversus, where the internal organs grow perfectly reversed inside the chest. They pinpointed MAP2, a gene responsible for the intricate scaffolding of brain cells, guiding the physical structure of the neurons. But even with all these pieces of the puzzle laid out on the table, the picture remains stubbornly incomplete. The geneticists concluded that handedness is only about 25% heritable in total, leaving a massive void in our understanding. 75% of the mystery exists outside the rigid sequence of the DNA, floating in an unknown space. The genes build the foundation, but they don't finish the house. They leave the final construction up to chance. We stare at the scrolling letters on the glowing screen, realizing the limits of our own biological blueprints. If genes only account for a quarter of the mystery, what forces step in to decide the rest? What happens in the dark, silent waters of the womb to shape the destiny of the human hand? The harsh blue light of the computer monitor softens, shifting into a warm, organic glow. We leave the digital realm and enter the quiet, fluid space of human gestation, a place of slow, monumental building. Listen to the slow, submerged heartbeat of a fetus floating peacefully in the amniotic fluid, a rhythmic thrumming that echoes like a drum. The womb provides a chemical bath, a delicate ecosystem of hormones and nutrients shaping the developing brain. In the 1980s, a neurologist named Norman Geschwind and his colleague Albert Galaberda proposed a radical new theory. They looked at the statistical quirks of the left-handed population and built a bold hypothesis connecting the brain to the immune system. They noticed that left-handedness often clustered alongside autoimmune disorders, learning disabilities, and severe seasonal allergies. but they also observed its connection to extraordinary mathematical ability, spatial reasoning, and rare musical talent. They needed a mechanism to explain how a single biological switch could trigger such a vast array of outcomes. Geschwind and Galaberda turned their attention to the chemical environment of the womb, specifically the role of testosterone. They theorized that high levels of testosterone during fetal development slow the growth of the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere normally dominates language and motor control for the right side of the body. If the left side experiences a delay, the right hemisphere receives a massive developmental head start. It expands its neural networks, taking over functions and altering the standard blueprint of the mind. This rapid growth in the right hemisphere, they argued, leads to the left-handed preference we see in the physical world. The theory provided an elegant explanation for a stubborn demographic fact that had puzzled researchers for years. Men produce more testosterone than women, even in the earlier stages of fetal development. Consequently, men are slightly more left-handed, sitting at 12% of the population compared to women at 10%. The testosterone hypothesis also attempted to explain the immune system links, suggesting the hormone alters the development of the thymus gland. It painted a picture of a brain forged in a chemical crucible, shaped by the microscopic fluctuations of the mother's body. The scientific community debated the Geschwind-Galaberda hypothesis for decades, testing its boundaries and searching for flaws in its logic. Ultimately, modern research proved the theory was too simple, a blunt instrument trying to explain a microscopic symphony. The direct link between testosterone and handedness couldn't hold up to the scrutiny of massive global datasets. But despite its flaws, the hypothesis opened a new door in the minds of scientists studying human development. It forced them to look at the journey from conception to childhood, searching for the invisible forces that mold the brain. The rhythmic heartbeat of the womb accelerates, pulling us forward through the timeline of human development. Watch a child grow in a rapid time-lapse, starting from the dark isolation of the embryonic sac. At just 15 weeks of gestation, long before the brain fully wires its motor cortex, a tiny fetus makes a choice. Ultrasound technology reveals the fetus raising an arm and sucking either its left or its right thumb. This primitive instinctual movement provides the earliest glimpse of the brain's asymmetry, a shadow of the person they will become. But this early preference doesn't lock the child into a permanent path. The brain remains a fluid, shifting landscape. The final determination of handedness doesn't fully fix into place until the age of 3 to 4, or sometimes even 6 to 7. During these crucial years, billions of neurons form trillions of delicate connections, wiring the architecture of thought and movement. The child reaches for blocks, grasps crayons, and stumbles across the floor, building muscle memory through trial and error. The environment interacts with the biology through the complex, fascinating mechanism of epigenetics. Picture the microscopic liquid snap of chemical tags attaching themselves to strands of DNA, like frost crystallizing on a cold window pane. These epigenetic tags don't change the genetic code itself. They act as volume knobs, turning specific genes up or down. The expression of the genes alters based on 1,000 invisible factors: the stress levels of the mother, nutritional shifts, and hormonal waves. The environment inside the womb creates a unique chemical signature, influencing the trajectory of the developing brain. But even epigenetics can't explain the full mystery, leading scientists to the concept of random developmental noise. At the quantum level of biology, proteins fold and cells divide with a tiny element of pure, unavoidable randomness. The system is so incredibly complex that tiny fluctuations in temperature or chemical concentration can cascade into massive structural changes. This developmental noise explains why identical twins, sharing the exact same DNA and the exact same womb, can experience slightly different prenatal environments. One twin receives a microscopic nudge to the left, while the other receives a nudge to the right. The die is cast in the dark, shaped by genes, hormones, and the sheer chaos of biological creation. Nature loads the dice with a slight bias toward the right, but chance ultimately rolls them across the table. The child emerges into the world, their brain wired by forces beyond their control, ready to navigate a physical landscape. The foundation is poured, the neurons are connected, and the dominant hand begins to reach out and manipulate the environment. Once the brain is built and the asymmetry takes hold, how differently does a left-hander's mind actually operate? The microscopic world fades, replaced by a glowing, three-dimensional neuromap of the human brain. We picture the cerebral cortex as a dark, sprawling city at night, waiting for the electricity to surge through its grid. Listen to the rhythmic magnetic thrumming of a functional MRI machine, a heavy pulse that rattles the air. The machine scans the living architecture of the mind, watching the lights turn on as the person performs specific tasks. When a right-handed person speaks or reads, the scanners show a uniform, highly predictable pattern of electricity. 95% of right-handers process language almost exclusively in the left hemisphere of their brain. The left hemisphere acts as the control center for the right side of the physical body, creating a neat, logical cross-wiring. The lights of the city illuminate the left side of the map, leaving the right side relatively dark and quiet. But when a left-hander slides into the fMRI machine, the rigid rules of the city completely break down. The 10% rebel against the standard zoning laws of the brain, creating a massive, unpredictable variability in the scans. 70% of left-handers keep their language processing in the left hemisphere, mirroring the right-handed majority. The remaining 30% trigger a stunning neurological display, lighting up the right hemisphere or distributing the power across both sides simultaneously. This bilateral language processing means the brain relies on a wider network of streets and highways to form a single sentence. The crossed wiring system exists in all mammals, allowing the left side of the brain to move the right paw of a dog or cat. But human lateralization is extreme, pushing the boundaries of asymmetry further than any other species on Earth. The right-handed brain favors intense specialization, clustering related functions together to maximize speed and efficiency. The left-handed brain sacrifices that uniform efficiency for a wider, more varied distribution of cognitive resources. The fMRI scans show the left-handed city lighting up in strange, beautiful patterns, the electricity jumping across unexpected pathways. No two left-handed brains look exactly alike on the monitor. They represent a spectrum of neurological diversity. This variation creates a mind that approaches problems from different angles, utilizing different regions of the cortex to reach a solution. The left-hander walks through a physical world designed for the right, forcing their brain to constantly adapt and translate. The electrical signals traverse the map, finding new routes when the standard highways hit a roadblock. If the city of the brain is zoned so differently, with language and motor control scattered across the map, how do the two halves communicate? The glowing lights of the brain map zoom inward, pulling us toward the deep central chasm dividing the two hemispheres. We enter a space of abstract thought, a dark void where geometric shapes slowly rotate and morph in the silence. Listen to the crackling energy of synapses firing back and forth, a storm of electricity leaping across a thick neural bridge. This massive bundle of millions of nerve fibers is called the corpus callosum, the central highway connecting the left and right brains. For decades, scientists debated the physical structure of this bridge in the left-handed mind. Some studies suggest that lefties possess a larger, more robust corpus callosum, built to handle the intense traffic of bilateral processing. Because their brains distribute tasks more evenly across both hemispheres, the communication bridge must carry a heavier load of electrical data. This increased connectivity feeds directly into the cultural narrative known as the creativity myth. Society loves to paint left-handers as innate artistic geniuses, inherently more creative than their right-handed counterparts. The truth, as revealed by the data, is far more nuanced and subtle than a simple declaration of superiority. Left-handers don't possess a magical switch for artistic brilliance, but they do show a modest, measurable statistical edge in specific cognitive tests. The architecture of their brain excels at divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple, unique solutions to a single open-ended problem. The increased communication across the corpus callosum allows the brain to connect seemingly unrelated concepts in novel ways. The geometric shapes rotating in the void snap together, forming patterns that a strictly lateralized brain might miss. Left-handers demonstrate slight advantages in spatial reasoning and mental rotation, easily visualizing objects from different angles in their mind's eye. This specific neurological flexibility explains why the 10% are slightly overrepresented in certain highly specialized professions. You find them clustered among the ranks of architects, artists, and musicians, fields that demand the seamless integration of logic and spatial awareness. The brain uses the robust corpus callosum to blend the analytical left hemisphere with the intuitive right, creating a fertile ground for innovation. The creativity isn't magic, It's the byproduct of a mind forced to communicate across a wider, more complex internal network. This flexibility isn't just an accident of biology, it is a carefully preserved evolutionary feature. The brain burns extra calories to maintain this thick connection, proving that the body values the ability to think outside the standard pathways. The controlled chaos of the left-handed mind provides a unique perspective, a different way of processing the visual and auditory data of the world. But how does this controlled chaos, this intense internal connectivity, save the brain when disaster strikes the physical body? The abstract void shifts into a bright clinical space, a room dedicated to the miraculous and grueling process of human healing. The geometric shapes dissolve into the intricate branching roots of a massive tree, representing the brain's internal wiring. Listen to the smooth, glowing flow of light traveling down the long insulated bundles of white matter axons. These are the deep subcortical highways of the brain, and we can map them using advanced diffusion tensor imaging. The imaging reveals that the wiring diagrams of a left-handed brain are drawn fundamentally differently than a right-handed one. The branches spread wider, creating a denser, more interconnected network of white matter tracks across the cortex. This structural difference grants the left-handed brain a massive, life-saving advantage known as neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself, to forge new neural pathways and adapt to devastating changes in its environment. Picture the brain rewiring itself like tree roots finding new, vital paths through compacted soil after a storm. When a massive stroke hits the left hemisphere of a heavily lateralized right-handed brain, the results are often catastrophic. Because the right-hander relies almost entirely on the left hemisphere for language, the damage wipes out their ability to speak or comprehend words. The rigid specialization of the brain becomes a trap, leaving the right hemisphere unable to pick up the slack. The patient faces a lifetime of permanent language deficits, their words locked behind a wall of damaged tissue. But when a stroke hits the left hemisphere of a left-handed brain, the story often ends with a remarkable recovery. Because the left-hander's language processing is already distributed, the brain simply reroutes the traffic to the surviving right hemisphere. The left-hander utilizes their enhanced neuroplasticity to recruit dormant neurons, rebuilding their speech capabilities in a matter of months. They recover faster, adapt quicker, and bypass the damaged regions of the cortex with an innate biological resilience. The left-handed brain also displays different emotional lateralization patterns, processing fear and anger through alternate pathways. This flexibility isn't a modern luxury. It evolved over 200,000 years of brutal existence in a dangerous world. Biology built a resilient, flexible mind, capable of surviving traumatic head injuries on the prehistoric battlefield. The 10% carried this physical and neurological insurance policy in their skulls, passing it down through the generations. They possessed a brain built for survival, designed to bounce back from the brink of destruction. The body protected the left-hander from the harsh realities of physical trauma, giving them a hidden edge in the fight for life. But while biology built a resilient, flexible mind, society was preparing to build a rigid, dogmatic cage. The abstract space of human healing fades, pulling us backward into a dark, paranoid era of Gothic architecture and creeping shadows. The scent of frankincense mixes with the sharp, acrid smoke of burning wood, hanging thick in the cold evening air. We step onto the rough, uneven cobblestones of a medieval European village, where the glow of a distant bonfire paints the stone walls in hues of orange and flickering red. Listen to the crackle and spit of the flames devouring dry timber, consuming the night with a ravenous hunger. A procession of monks walks slowly through the square, their voices merging into a low, ominous chant that vibrates through the soles of your shoes. The church towers loom overhead, casting long, sharp silhouettes that seem to cut the moonlight into jagged pieces. In this era, the linguistic biases of the ancient world morph into literal theological doctrine, shaping the boundaries of salvation and damnation. The English language adopts phrases like having 2 left feet, turning natural asymmetry into a mark of awkwardness and shame. The Latin word sinister tightens its grip on the culture, transforming from a simple direction into a synonym for the devil's work. The French word gauche solidifies its place in the vernacular, ensuring that any deviation from the right-handed norm carries the weight of societal rejection. The theologians of the Middle Ages spend their days in candlelit rooms, writing vast volumes that divide the universe into a binary conflict. They associate God, the right hand, and the path to salvation with light, order, and unquestioning obedience to the Church. They assign Satan, the left hand, and the path to eternal damnation to the shadows, chaos, and the wilderness lurking outside the city gates. Step inside a towering stone cathedral, where the stained glass windows filter the sunlight into muted shades of crimson and blue. Look up at the immense painted frescoes covering the ceiling, where the artist divides the afterlife according to the rigid rules of the clergy. The angels stand shoulder to shoulder on the right side of the Creator, bathing in the golden light of divine favour. The demons writhe in agony on the left side of the canvas, dragged down into the darkness by their own inherent corruption. A priest stands at the altar, raising his right hand to bless the congregation, a deliberate gesture meant to channel the Holy Spirit. Using the left hand to offer a blessing or pass the communion bread constitutes a profound, unforgivable insult to the divine order. The paranoia spills out of the chapels and into the streets, fueling the horrific reality of the witch trials stretching from the 15th to the 18th centuries. Inquisitors search for physical signs of demonic pacts, hunting for any anomaly that marks a person as an agent of the underworld. They scrutinize the villagers, watching how they sweep their floors, how they spin their wool, and how they cut their bread. The simple, biological instinct to reach for a knife with the left hand becomes terrifying evidence of witchcraft, a death sentence written in the nerves. The crackle of the bonfire grows louder, consuming the lives of those who fail to mask their true nature from the zealous eyes of their neighbours. Imagine being a child in this paranoid world, hiding in the corner of a damp room, trying to force your own hand to obey a foreign command. You learn to hate the very muscles in your arm, fearing the fire that waits for anyone who steps outside the boundaries of the 90%. The smoke from the European bonfires drifts across the oceans, touching the shores of different continents and blending into a montage of childhoods around the world. We travel through the 16th century, visiting villages and cities bound together by the same invisible fear of the minority. Listen to the sudden, sharp sting of a wooden ruler slapping across a bare wrist in a small candlelit room. A harsh, whispered scolding follows the strike, a parent pulling a child into the shadows to correct a biological sin. The parents love their children, but they operate under the crushing weight of cultural superstition, believing they must save the soul by breaking the body. Priests and village elders walk the dirt roads, warning families that the devil marks his followers by twisting their natural instincts. We leave Europe and step into the bustling, vibrant markets of the Islamic societies, where the sun beats down on colourful silk and brass merchants. The culture designates the left hand as spiritually and physically unclean, reserving its use for the private, hidden matters of bathroom hygiene. The right hand belongs to the light, handling the sacred text of the Quran, passing plates of warm food, and greeting guests at the door. Reaching for a piece of bread with the forbidden hand breaks a profound social contract, bringing immediate shame to the table. The rules dictate every micro-interaction of daily life, forcing the 10% to navigate a constant, exhausting internal translation of their movements. The journey continues into the heart of Africa, across the sprawling landscapes of Asia, and deep into the lush emerald rainforests of South America. Different languages echo through the trees, but the identical prejudice repeats itself in 1,000 different dialects and tribal customs. The communities reserve the left hand for dirty work, for handling the refuse, for touching the dead, and for working the soil. They demand the right hand for social engagement, for passing gifts, for sealing agreements, and for holding the weapons of defense. Elders tell stories around the evening fires, whispering that a left-handed child carries a curse forged in the dark waters of the womb. They believe the mother encountered an evil spirit during her pregnancy, twisting the baby's mind and bringing bad luck to the entire bloodline. The children in these vast, diverse landscapes share a silent, lonely struggle, feeling the constant friction of a world designed against their instincts. They watch the other children play, noticing how easily the majority moves, how the tools and the toys seem to fit perfectly into their friends' palms. The left-handed child feels an invisible wall separating them from the group, a physical barrier constructed by the accumulated myths of 100 generations. The fear of being ostracized forces them to adapt, to build a false persona that mirrors the expectations of the village elders. The religion of the medieval world saw the trait as evil, a deliberate rebellion against the divine order of the universe. The The superstitions of the global villages saw it as a spiritual sickness, a dark omen that threatened the harvest and the health of the tribe. The industrial age waits just over the horizon, bringing a new era of machines, factories, and scientific categorization. The coming factories won't care about demons, spirits, or ancient curses, but they will demand a new kind of rigid conformity. Science prepares to rebrand the ancient trait as a curable medical disease, bringing a new type of suffering to the classroom. The smoke and dirt of the ancient world wash away, replaced by the rigid grey aesthetic of a 19th century Victorian schoolroom. The air smells of chalk dust, polished floorboards, and the cold, unyielding metal of identical desks bolted to the ground in perfect straight rows. The Industrial Revolution hums outside the tall glass windows, filling the sky with thick plumes of dark soot from the factory smokestacks. Inside the classroom, the Victorian educators apply the same brutal logic of the assembly line to the complex, delicate minds of young children. Listen to the sharp, terrifying crack of a wooden ruler striking the surface of a wooden desk, echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. The teacher patrols the aisles with a face devoid of empathy, enforcing the new scientific doctrines of the age. The physicians and scholars of the 19th century abandon the medieval talk of demons, replacing it with the cold, clinical language of medical pathology. They redefine left-handedness as a fundamental defect of the nervous system, a biological failure that needs immediate, forceful correction. They introduce the concept of atavism, declaring that the trait represents a dangerous reversion to a primitive, uncivilized state of human evolution. They argue that allowing a child to favor the wrong hand encourages the animalistic instincts to surface, threatening the moral fabric of the modern empire. The schools implement rigid, unforgiving policies designed to crush the natural neurology and forge a compliant, right-handed citizen for the industrial machine. The physical devices of conformity resemble the instruments of a prison, brought into the light of the classroom to ensure unyielding discipline. Teachers tie the left hands of their students to the iron frames of the desks, using thick, coarse rope that chafes the delicate skin of the wrist. They strap the offending arms behind the children's backs for hours at a time, forcing them to balance their bodies in a state of constant, aching tension. Some educators force the children to sit on their left hands throughout the entire school day, creating a numbness that travels all the way up to the shoulder. The children struggle to hold their dip pens with their non-dominant fingers, crying silent tears as the ink blots and ruins their pristine paper. The medical journals of the era publish sprawling authoritative articles linking the use of the left hand to a litany of childhood anxieties. They confidently declare that the trait causes bedwetting, nail-biting, and a general weakness of the constitution, blaming the child's biology for the stress the school inflicts. The pain of the forced conversion doesn't stop when the school bell rings. It follows the child home, haunting their movements at the dinner table and in the playroom. Parents, terrified by the warnings of the prominent physicians, continue the enforcement in the privacy of their own parlours, watching their children like hawks. A child reaches for a wooden toy or a silver spoon with their natural instinct, only to receive a sharp reprimand that makes them flinch and pull away. The constant suppression of their physical nature creates a deep, lingering anxiety, a feeling that their very existence is somehow flawed and unacceptable to the world. They learn to associate their own bodies with punishment, internalizing the idea that they must wage a daily war against their own muscle memory. The society firmly believes that forcing right-handedness improves the moral character of the youth, building willpower through the endurance of physical pain. They think they are saving the child from a life of degeneracy, moulding them into a proper, functional gear for the giant clockwork of the Victorian economy. You can tie a hand with coarse rope, and you can strike a tender knuckle with a wooden ruler. But what happens when you try to forcibly rewire the ancient architecture of a human brain? The rigid geometry of the Victorian classroom dissolves into a profoundly empathetic psychological space, holding the quiet echoes of a damaged generation. The physical bruises on the knuckles fade over time, but the lingering trauma settles deep into the adult shoulders, carried like an invisible weight. Listen to the painful, halting, struggling sound of a severe stutter echoing through the opulent gold-leafed halls of a royal palace. The 20th century studies begin to document the devastating neurological fallout of the Victorian Crusade, revealing the enormous damage inflicted upon the 10%. The scientists discover that you can't force the brain to abandon its natural wiring without causing a catastrophic disruption to the delicate networks of the mind. The forced conversion sparks a dramatic rise in the rates of stuttering and profound speech impediments among the retrained children. The speech centers of the brain share a fundamental link to the motor control centers, governing hand preference, operating on the exact same neural highways. When a teacher forces a left-handed child to write with the right hand, they create a vast traffic jam of electrical signals in the cortex. The brain struggles to coordinate the new, unnatural muscle movements while simultaneously trying to process the complex mechanics of language and vocalization. The resulting friction manifests as a stutter, a physical hesitation where the words become trapped behind the teeth, unable to break free. The studies also reveal a surge in dyslexia-like symptoms as the forced children begin reversing their letters and struggling to decode the written word. The royal family of England provides one of the most tragic high-profile examples of this misguided educational philosophy. King George VI suffers under the unyielding demands of his father, King George V, who forces the young prince to abandon his natural left-handedness. The resulting trauma leaves the future king with a severe, debilitating stutter, a public struggle that haunts his reign and tests his courage on the world stage. The trauma crosses the boundaries of class and geography, reaching into the working-class neighborhoods of America decades later. A young Jimi Hendrix faces the wrath of his father, who firmly believes that playing a guitar left-handed is a sign of the devil's influence. His father forces the boy to hold the instrument right-handed, instilling a deep sense of wrongness that Hendrix has to subvert by playing upside down when his father leaves the room. The therapists of the era begin to interview these adults, unearthing memories of childhood spent in a state of perpetual, exhausting vigilance against their own reflexes. The patients describe the sheer physical fatigue of trying to maintain the right-handed mask, a performance that drains their energy and saps their joy. They talk about the shame that washes over them when their left hand instinctively shoots out to catch a falling glass, betraying their true nature to the room. The psychological toll of constantly monitoring your own body creates a barrier to genuine expression, locking the individual inside a cage of second-guessing. The mind, meant to be a fluid, creative engine, becomes a rigid warden, policing every tiny movement of the fingers and the wrists. The emotional damage of the conversion era runs deeper than the stutters and the reversed letters, carving permanent scars into the psychological foundation of millions of victims. Children grow up plagued by chronic anxiety, haunted by vivid nightmares, and burdened by a pervasive, suffocating feeling that they are fundamentally broken. The damage becomes undeniable, stacking up in the medical journals, forcing science to finally step in and stop the madness. The harsh winter chill of the conversion era begins to thaw, giving way to a slow, gradual return of colour and acceptance in the classroom. The heavy wooden desks look a little less intimidating, and the sunlight streaming through the windows feels warmer, carrying the promise of a new understanding. Listen to the soft, relieving sigh of a left-handed child sitting at a colourful table, surrounded by paper scraps and pots of bright paint. A teacher walks over, smiles gently, and hands the child a pair of green-handled scissors designed specifically for the left hand. It's a small, quiet moment of liberation, the sound of the plastic handles opening and closing representing a monumental shift in human history. During the 1930s and 1940s, brave psychologists began publishing relentless research detailing the immense damage caused by forced conversion. They laid the evidence out on the tables of the academic conferences, proving that fighting the brain's natural asymmetry leads only to trauma and neurological pain. The slow wheels of societal change began to turn, grinding against centuries of ingrained prejudice and unfounded superstition. By the time the world entered the 1960s and 1970s, the rigid school systems finally started to relax their iron grip on the students' hands. The rulers stayed on the chalkboards, the ropes disappeared into the trash, and teachers began to let the children naturally find their own physical balance. The transition away from persecution didn't happen overnight. It required millions of small individual acts of defiance from parents who refused to break their children's spirits. Mothers and fathers sat across from stern headmasters, defending their child's right to hold a pencil without facing the sting of a wooden cane. The manufacturing world slowly began to notice this untapped demographic, realizing that the 10% needed their own tools to navigate the physical space. Companies started producing specialized equipment, carving out a tiny slice of the market for the left-handed consumer who just wanted to cut a piece of paper without pain. This commercial recognition, born out of capitalism rather than pure empathy, still provided a profound psychological validation to a community used to being ignored. The simple act of buying a notebook that doesn't dig metal coils into your wrist becomes a quiet celebration of your right to exist comfortably. When the 1980s and 1990s arrived, the practice of forced conversion largely reached its end in the developed nations of the world. But as the smoke clears from this long, unnecessary war against biology, we have to look back and understand the true roots of the persecution. Human beings operate as supreme pattern-seeking mammals, constantly scanning their environment for anything that breaks the established rhythm of the tribe. Our brains equate difference with danger, assuming that anyone who operates outside the standard parameters poses a hidden threat to the group's survival. The persecution was never truly about demons, spiritual curses, or Victorian morality. It was always about the primal desire for social and physical control. Societies fear unpredictability, striving to build massive cultures where every citizen moves, thinks, and works in perfect synchronized harmony. The 10% disrupted that harmony simply by existing, forcing the majority to confront a variation they couldn't predict or easily manage in a crowd. They faced fear and punishment because they brought a different angle, a different rhythm to the mundane mechanics of daily life. And in the brutal, unforgiving dawn of the ancient world, where survival hung by a thread, unpredictability was not just an inconvenience, it was a deadly, terrifying weapon. The quiet relief of the modern classroom shatters, replaced by the fast-paced, adrenaline-filled roar of a packed sporting arena. The blinding white lights beat down on the canvas of a boxing ring, illuminating the sweat flying from the faces of two fighters locked in combat. Listen to the rapid, terrifying thwack of leather striking leather, a boxing glove landing a devastating blow a split second before the opponent can raise their guard. In the world of high-stakes, close-quarters combat, the 10% stop being the victims of societal prejudice and transform into the apex predators. Evolutionary biologists call this phenomenon frequency-dependent selection, a mathematical principle where the rarity of a trait creates its own immense advantage. When you look at the general population, the left-handers hold steady at that stubborn 10% anchor, a vast minority navigating a right-handed world, but step inside the ropes of professional boxing, and that number experiences a massive, statistically impossible jump up to 20 or 25%. Walk over to the elegant, lightning-fast pistes of professional fencing, and you find that more than a third of the grand finalists hold their foils in their left hands. You see the same disproportionate dominance in judo, mixed martial arts, table tennis, and on the pristine clay courts of professional tennis, with legends like Rafael Nadal. The advantage doesn't come from a magical increase in strength, or a mystical boost to their reaction times. The rarity itself functions as the ultimate weapon. A right-handed fighter spends their entire life training against other right-handers, building deep subconscious muscle memory for the standard angles of attack and defense. They know exactly how a right-handed jab looks when it leaves the shoulder, and their brain triggers the parry without a conscious thought. They fight thousands of rounds against the 90%, programming their nervous system to expect the danger to come from a specific, predictable geometry. But when a southpaw steps into the ring, the entire physical map of the fight flips upside down, destroying the right-hander's carefully built reflexes. The left-hander's power hand and lead leg occupy the exact space where the right-hander's brain assumes there is only open air. The physical dynamics of this mirrored combat create a beautiful, violent dance of shifting balance and constant misdirection on the canvas. When a southpaw and an orthodox fighter face off, their lead feet constantly step on the outside of each other, fighting for the dominant angle of attack. The left-hander naturally controls this footwork battle, stepping outside the opponent's lead leg and lining up their powerful rear hand for a devastating strike. The right-hander finds themselves constantly turning, trying to square up their shoulders while taking punches from an angle they rarely encounter in the gym. The liver, a vulnerable target on the right side of the human body, sits perfectly exposed to the left-hander's whipping body kick or crushing hook. The nervous system of the right-hander experiences a system overload, forced to consciously calculate defensive moves that should happen purely by instinct. This constant mental processing slows their reaction time by a fraction of a second, but in the realm of elite combat, a fraction of a second equals a knockout. The southpaw perfectly understands the geometry of the right-hander, anticipating the attacks and slipping the punches with practiced, effortless grace built over years of adaptation. They force the opponent to fight in a mirrored reality, drowning them in an ocean of unfamiliar angles, reversed footwork and hidden strikes. In the brightly lit arenas of modern sports, this neurological rarity wins golden trophies, but in the dark, prehistoric dawns, it won the ultimate prize of physical survival. The blinding lights of the boxing ring fade into the dense, suffocating canopy of a prehistoric jungle, where the air hangs thick with humidity and the scent of damp earth. The raw, brutal reality of ancient tribal warfare surrounds you, a world where life and death get decided in the dirt, far away from the rules of civilization. Listen to the low, tense hum of insects vibrating in a jungle clearing, a sound that suddenly stops just seconds before a hidden ambush erupts from the tree line. Here, the evolutionary theory known as the balance hypothesis takes center stage, explaining exactly why the left-handed population never grows beyond its 10% anchor. The mathematical advantage of the left-hander only exists as long as they remain in the minority, riding the wave of their own unpredictability. If the left-handers were to multiply and reach 50% of the population, the element of surprise would vanish completely from the battlefield. The right-handers would adapt, gaining equal experience fighting against the reversed angles, and the southpaw advantage would dissolve into a perfectly symmetrical stalemate. Evolution constantly plays a brutal game of tug-of-war, balancing the severe neurological costs of lateralization against the immense payoff in close-quarters combat. The physical world punishes the left-hander with tools that don't fit and environments that cause friction, creating a biological tax on their existence. But in the violent clashes of early humanity, the ability to strike an enemy from a blind angle pays that tax in the pure currency of survival. When anthropologists travel to the remote corners of the globe to study traditional small-scale societies, they uncover a dark and fascinating set of data. These isolated tribes live in environments untouched by modern police forces or formal justice systems, where the homicide rates dwarf the statistics of the Western world. In these traditional societies, violence isn't a rare anomaly. It forms a constant, terrifying backdrop to daily life, driving the forces of natural selection in real time. The researchers analyze the demographics of these highly violent cultures, mapping the populations in the deep jungles of South America and the remote islands of the Pacific. They discover that as the murder rates skyrocket, the percentage of left-handers rises in perfect synchronization, breaking the 10% rule. In the most violent traditional societies on Earth, the rate of left-handedness climbs rapidly to 15%, pushes into 20%, and sometimes hits 25%. The warriors of these remote tribes craft their wooden spears and carve their bone knives, knowing that a single raid can wipe out an entire generation in minutes. The left-handed fighter in these skirmishes doesn't fight for a golden belt. They fight to protect their family, utilizing their mirrored stance to block thrusts that would kill a right-handed man. The right-handed attackers lunge forward, expecting the parry to come from the standard side, only to find the left-hander's weapon already sliding past their guard. The speed and unpredictability of the southpaw make them highly valued protectors of the village, heroes who stand at the front line when the war cries echo through the trees. Over hundreds of years, the survivors of these bloody conflicts mate and pass their resilient, adaptable DNA down the family tree, slowly altering the genetic makeup of the tribe. The peaceful societies where cooperation, agriculture, and trade outweigh the immediate need for lethal force see the left-handed numbers drop back down to the standard 10% baseline. The dance between violence and asymmetry dictates the demographic shape of the human population, proving that our bodies carry the silent scars of our ancestral wars. This isn't just a modern evolutionary theory calculated on a spreadsheet. It was recorded by the ancient storytellers who witnessed it firsthand on the dusty battlefields of antiquity. The humid jungle clears, opening up into the gritty, sun-scorched stone textures of the biblical deserts, where armies march across the rolling dunes. We open the ancient, crumbling pages of the Hebrew Bible, turning to the Book of Judges to read a military account recorded thousands of years ago. The text describes an elite unit of 700 chosen men from the tribe of Benjamin, a terrifying force of specialized warriors. The scribes specifically note that every single man in this unit was a left-handed slinger, trained to hurl stones with lethal, unwavering accuracy. The scripture claims they could sling a stone at a single hair and not miss, turning their rarity into an overwhelming tactical advantage on the ancient battlefield. The story continues with Ehud, a legendary left-handed hero who uses his unpredictable biology to orchestrate a daring political assassination. He travels to the court of an oppressive king, carrying a double-edged blade hidden securely beneath his cloak. The palace guards search him for weapons, checking his left thigh, the standard location where a right-handed man draws his sword. They find nothing and let him pass, completely ignoring his right thigh, where Ehud has strapped his hidden blade, ready for his dominant left hand to strike. The assassination succeeds precisely because the guards' brains operate on the assumption of a right-handed world, proving that the blind spot extends far beyond the boxing ring. Centuries later, this physical geometry of war shapes the architecture of Europe, influencing the construction of massive stone fortresses. Picture the claustrophobic, damp environment of a medieval castle, the echoing clash of steel on stone ringing out in the darkness. As you look at the design of the defensive towers, you notice a distinct pattern. The spiral staircases always ascend in a tight clockwise direction. The architects designed these stairs specifically to give the right-handed defenders the ultimate advantage when fighting off an invading army. As the right-handed defender backs up the stairs, the clockwise curve opens up the space for their sword arm, allowing for wide, powerful, sweeping strikes. Meanwhile, the right-handed attacker charging up the stairs finds their sword arm jammed tight against the inner stone pillar, restricting their movements to weak, awkward thrusts. The sound of the battle echoes through the narrow stone corridors, a chaotic symphony of grunts, sliding boots, and shattering iron. The left-handed warrior thrives in this confined, terrifying space, utilizing the very architecture that was designed to destroy him. He steps into the curve of the wall, using the stone as a shield for his right side while his left arm delivers crushing blows over the banister. The right-handed defenders, trained to fight off standard attacks, stare in horror as the blade comes from the wrong side of the stairwell, slipping past their wooden shields. The castle designers, brilliant engineers of their time, built a massive fortress based on a statistical probability, betting the lives of the lords on the 90% rule. They built massive iron gates, dug deep moats, and raised towering stone walls, only to leave a glaring vulnerability in the spiral geometry of the keep. The left-hander exploits this statistical blind spot, rewriting the rules of the siege through the simple biological reality of their physical asymmetry. They walk through the world seeing opportunities that remain invisible to the majority, unlocking doors that others don't even realize exist. The left-hander finds a sudden, lethal opening in the exact place where the rest of the world finds a solid wall, an ability that translates perfectly to the peaceful canvas of the artist. The chaotic noise of the castle siege fades into the dim, quiet focus of a Florentine workshop during the height of the Italian Renaissance. The air smells strongly of linseed oil, crushed pigment, and the dry, dusty scent of genius pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. The room sits cluttered with half-finished canvas frames, scattered wooden tools, and massive, detailed anatomical sketches pinned to the wooden walls. Listen to the soft, backward scrape of a quill dragging across rough parchment, leaving behind a flawless, unsmudged trail of dark ink. Leonardo da Vinci sits at his desk, his left hand moving steadily from the right side of the page to the left, writing in his famous mirrored script. For centuries, historians romanticized this mirror writing, claiming it was a brilliant, paranoid cipher designed to hide his scientific secrets from the spies of the church. But the truth points to a far more practical biological adaptation, born out of the simple mechanics of being a left-hander in a right-to-left world. If Da Vinci wrote standard Italian from left to right, his dominant hand would constantly drag across the wet ink, ruining the delicate notes and smearing his observations. By reversing the text entirely, he pulls his hand away from the fresh ink, creating a pristine, legible record of his genius without fighting the physical medium. His left-handedness isn't just a quirk of his handwriting, it represents a profound lateralization flexibility that allows him to seamlessly fuse the rigid rules of science with the fluid beauty of art. The brilliance of the Renaissance lies in this fusion of disciplines, the breaking down of the walls between the analytical mathematician and the emotional sculptor. The left-handed mind, with its distributed processing and robust neural bridges, serves as the perfect engine for this era of unprecedented discovery. Da Vinci dissects the human body, tracing the veins and the muscles with the cold precision of a surgeon, and then renders them with the delicate touch of a master painter. He observes the flow of water around a stone, mapping the chaotic turbulence in his notebooks, and applies that exact same mathematical logic to the curls of a woman's hair on the canvas. The bilateral brain doesn't see a division between the science of the world and the art of the soul. It views them as a single, interconnected puzzle waiting to be solved. We leave the dusty workshop in Florence and travel south to Rome, entering the quiet, echoing awe of the Sistine Chapel. The air feels cool and sacred, the vast interior waiting for the touch of another Renaissance master to bring the plaster to life. Michelangelo climbs the immense wooden scaffolding, lying on his back just inches away from the ceiling, enduring agonizing physical pain to complete his masterpiece. Historians long debated his true-handedness, but modern scientific analysis of the ceiling reveals the hidden truth locked inside the paint. Researchers aim powerful X-rays at the frescoes, studying the microscopic layers of pigment, the direction of the shading, and the specific angles of the brushwork. The strokes tell a story of left-handed dominance, the paint applied with a sweeping motion that perfectly matches the biomechanics of the left arm. Michelangelo channels this same energy, using his deep understanding of spatial reasoning to carve the imposing figure of David from a single flawed block of marble. He sees the perfect form trapped inside the stone, calculating the weight, the balance, and the tension of the figure long before his chisel strikes the surface. They didn't just survive in a world built for the 90%, they bent the rules of perception to create a beauty that changed the course of history. They utilized the enhanced communication across their corpus callosum to see the geometric structures of anatomy and translate them into breathtaking emotion. Could other left-handers use this exact same neurological flexibility to bend the political fate of entire nations? The quiet, reverent atmosphere of the Sistine Chapel dissolves into the opulent, gold-trimmed halls of royalty and the tense electric environments of modern politics. We step onto the sprawling battlefields of the 19th century, where empires rise and fall under the command of legendary military strategists. The myth of Napoleon Bonaparte casts a long shadow over history, painting him as a left-handed genius who commanded his armies with unpredictable brilliance. The historical reality suggests he was likely right-handed, but the fact that people actively mythologized him as a left-hander reveals a profound societal truth. The culture wanted him to be left-handed, associating the trait with the strategic unpredictability and the unorthodox thinking required to conquer a continent. Across the English Channel, the reality of left-handed leadership takes the throne in the form of Queen Victoria, ruling over the largest empire in history. She sits in the quiet corners of Buckingham Palace, favouring her left hand as she manages the affairs of a rapidly changing, industrialising world. But the true, astonishing cluster of left-handed power doesn't fully emerge until we cross the ocean and enter the 20th century of the United States. We walk into the Oval Office, where the heavy wooden desk sits surrounded by the flashing bulbs of press cameras and the tense murmur of reporters. Listen to the heavy, deliberate scratch of an executive fountain pen signing a massive, world-altering piece of legislation into law. The flashing lights of the press briefing room capture the left hand moving across the parchment, sealing the fate of millions with a signature. The political landscape demands a mind that can read the room, anticipating the shifting alliances and the hidden motives of foreign diplomats and domestic rivals. The left-hander, who spends their entire life constantly translating a right-handed physical world, develops an ingrained capacity for rapid adaptation. They learn from childhood how to assess an environment, identify the friction points, and quickly calculate a workaround to achieve their goal. This lifelong training in problem-solving scales up perfectly to the monumental task of running a superpower in a volatile, interconnected world. The mathematical odds of the 10% completely shatter when we look at the modern history of the American presidency. Harry Truman steps into the role, navigating the terrifying dawn of the atomic age, bringing his left-handed perspective to the ultimate decisions of war. Gerald Ford occupies the office, followed by Ronald Reagan, a natural left-hander who suffered the Victorian retraining process in his youth, but kept his underlying neurology. George H.W. Bush takes the oath, managing the delicate collapse of the Soviet Union, signing treaties with his left hand as the cameras flash. Bill Clinton continues the streak, using his left-handed charisma to navigate the massive economic shifts of the 1990s. Then Barack Obama enters the spotlight, famously photographed over and over again, hooking his left hand around his documents to sign bills into law. Statistically, this sheer concentration of left-handed leaders defies all normal probability, suggesting that the rare neurology provides a distinct, measurable edge in the political arena. The job of a president requires constant, relentless divergent thinking, forcing a single human being to juggle a dozen catastrophic crises simultaneously. The brain must process conflicting information, synthesize advice from endless advisors, and find a novel path through a maze of impossible choices. Does this unique, bilateral brain wiring naturally lend itself to the art of brilliant improvisation under the crushing weight of global pressure? Let's step away from the rigid political theatre and look at the ultimate improvisers, the artists who use their hands to rewrite the fundamental rules of sound. The sterile walls of the Oval Office fall away, replaced by the hazy, smoke-filled air and the electrifying atmosphere of a packed concert stage. The visceral, resonant vibration of the bass guitar thumps deep inside your chest, matching the rhythm of a roaring, ecstatic crowd. The music industry operates on tools designed almost exclusively for the 90%, forcing the minority to navigate a world of biased instruments. Standard violins feature peg boxes and chin rests molded for the right side. Pianos demand the complex melody from the right hand, and drum kits follow a strict right-leading geometry. But the true left-handed musicians don't just endure these physical constraints, they weaponize them, turning the friction into a new language of sonic rebellion. Listen to the sudden static crackle of a massive amplifier, followed by the unique heavy bend of a guitar string pulled entirely upside down. Jimi Hendrix walks onto the stage holding a standard right-handed Stratocaster, but he refuses to play by the manufacturer's rules. He flips the entire instrument upside down, restringing it so the thick bass strings sit on top, completely altering the physical tension of the wood. The pickups, designed to capture the sound in a specific way, suddenly read the vibrations backward, creating a thick, howling tone that no right-handed guitar can replicate. Because the tremolo arm now sits at the top of the bridge, Hendrix manipulates it with the heel of his hand, creating his signature, diving vibrato. The stage lights flash, casting long dynamic shadows across the musicians as they pour their souls into the roaring amplifiers. When a left-hander plays the guitar, their dominant hand handles the rhythmic strumming and the complex finger-picking patterns, while the non-dominant hand navigates the fretboard. This reversal of the standard workload forces the brain to route the musical data through different neural pathways, resulting in a phrasing that feels inherently unorthodox. The solos wander into unexpected scales, pausing on notes that a conventionally trained player would rush past, creating a beautiful, chaotic tension in the song. The physical limitation becomes the catalyst for unparalleled innovation, proving that comfort often acts as the enemy of true, groundbreaking art. Across the ocean, Paul McCartney stands on the stage with the Beatles, holding his iconic violin-shaped bass guitar pointing to the left. The entire rhythm section of the biggest band in history anchors itself on a left-handed perspective, changing the way the bass lines groove beneath the melody. McCartney's dominant left hand leads the complex fretwork, creating melodic, walking bass lines that define the sound of an entire generation. Decades later, the grunge movement erupts from the garages of Seattle, and Kurt Cobain steps up to the microphone with Nirvana. Cobain wields his left-handed Fender Mustangs and Jaguars like weapons, turning the physical awkwardness of his stance into the visual language of pure, unfiltered rebellion. The left-handed guitar becomes a profound symbol of the outsider, the physical manifestation of an artist who refuses to conform to the shiny, manufactured pop machine. Forcing a brilliant brain to adapt to an instrument built for someone else doesn't just create technical difficulty, it opens entirely new, undiscovered doors in musical style. The left-handed musician discovers weird chords that right-handers naturally avoid, finds strange rhythms hidden in the awkward transitions, and builds a unique sonic architecture out of the compromise. They bent the physical tool to fit the strange, beautiful wiring of their bodies, creating a legacy of art that echoes through the decades. What happens when the tool isn't a piece of carved wood and steel wire, but the cold, abstract logic of mathematics, and the grand puzzle is the nature of reality itself? The roaring feedback of the amplifier fades into the quiet, intense atmosphere of a laboratory in Paris, smelling of ozone and glowing with strange radiation. The world of science demands a mind capable of seeing the invisible forces that govern the universe, a mind willing to question the fundamental laws of nature. We watch Marie Curie working tirelessly in the dim light, isolating the radioactive elements that will change the course of physics and medicine forever. She stands at the heavy wooden benches taking meticulous notes, photographed and documented by her peers as clearly favouring her left hand for her most delicate work. She possesses a mind so profoundly adaptable that she becomes the first person in history to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 entirely different scientific fields. The scene shifts from the glowing beakers of Paris to a secretive, high-stakes wooden hut in Britain during the darkest days of the Second World War. The air in Bletchley Park feels thick with cigarette smoke, the tension of the looming conflict, and the desperate ticking clock of human survival. Listen to the rhythmic, mechanical clicking of the Enigma code-breaking machine, layered beneath the quiet, urgent scratching of chalk on a massive blackboard. Alan Turing, the undisputed father of modern computer science, stands before the board, his left hand writing out the impossible equations of cryptographic theory. He looks at the intercept data, seeing through the scrambled letters and recognizing the hidden mathematical patterns that elude the greatest right-handed minds of his generation. The chalk dust settles on the floor of the wooden hut, gathering like snow as Turing furiously calculates the shifting rotors of the German war machine. He builds machines to defeat machines, translating the abstract concepts of algorithmic logic into physical gears and electrical relays. The left-handed mind thrives in this intersection between the theoretical and the tangible, effortlessly converting numbers into shapes and shapes into numbers. The constant need to adapt to a world that doesn't fit their bodies acts as a lifelong cognitive workout, strengthening the neural pathways responsible for complex problem-solving. While a right-handed child moves through life on a frictionless track, the left-handed child constantly encounters obstacles that require a conscious, deliberate workaround. How do I tie my shoes when the instructions are backward, and how do I use this tool when the handle points the wrong way? The brain treats every daily task as a puzzle, building a vast reservoir of creative stamina that pays off when applied to the grand mysteries of the universe. When sociologists and neurologists study the extreme ends of human intelligence, they uncover a fascinating, undeniable statistical cluster. Left-handers show an immense overrepresentation at the very highest tiers of advanced mathematics, theoretical physics, and complex spatial reasoning. The brain wiring that causes a stutter when forced to write with the right hand provides a massive advantage when visualizing a tesseract or calculating quantum mechanics. They excel in fields where the problems lack a linear step-by-step solution, where the mind must jump across the void to find the answer. The corpus callosum acts as a superhighway for abstract thought, allowing the left hemisphere's logic to dance seamlessly with the right hemisphere's spatial intuition. The world looks at these historical figures and labels them as innate, untouchable geniuses, born with a magical spark that separates them from the rest of humanity. But we have to ask the deeper, more profound question about the true, hidden origins of this remarkable intellectual flexibility. Was it truly just innate genius, granted by a random, lucky roll of the genetic dice? Or did their towering brilliance come from the relentless, exhausting process of solving 1,000 tiny micropuzzles every single day just to exist in a backward world? The abstract equations of the scientific geniuses fall away, bringing us back down to a sharp, uncompromising return to the mundane reality of the everyday. We leave the grand stages of history to examine the subtle, invisible friction of domestic life, a physical landscape perfectly tailored for the 90%. The world doesn't build its tools with malicious intent, but it builds them with a profound, unthinking bias that creates 1,000 tiny cuts. Listen to the frustrating, grinding squeak of a manual can opener being cranked backward, the gears slipping as a left hand tries to force the mechanism. A right-handed person grabs the opener, twists the knob away from their body, and the blade glides smoothly around the edge of the tin. When a left-hander grabs that exact same tool, they have to reach awkwardly across the top, cranking the knob toward themselves in a motion that strains the wrist. Feel the cold press of a thick metal spiral digging into the soft skin of your hand as you try to write on the left page of a notebook. The right-hander writes away from the binding, their hand resting comfortably on the flat, smooth surface of the paper, their thoughts flowing without physical interruption. The left-hander has to elevate their wrist, hovering awkwardly over the metal coils, their handwriting suffering as they fight the very structure of the book. Every time they sit down to write a letter or take a note, the physical environment demands a micro-negotiation just to accomplish a basic task. The kitchen drawers and office supply closets serve as a hidden museum of right-handed privilege, storing everyday objects that act as tiny puzzles for the minority. Look at the simple measuring cup, with the metric lines printed clearly on one side, facing the right-handed chef perfectly as they hold it by the handle. The left-hander picks it up, and they stare at a blank glass wall, forced to twist their wrist around just to see the measurements. Consider the swiping mechanisms of credit card machines, the coin slots on vending machines, and the cup holders in cars, all naturally favouring the right side of the space. The left-hander moves through this landscape like a traveller in a foreign country, constantly translating the physical geometry before they can act. Pick up a standard pair of scissors and study the subtle, hidden engineering of the blades that makes them a nightmare for the 10%. When a right hand squeezes the handles, the natural inward pressure of the thumb pushes the two sharp blades tightly together, creating a clean, perfect slice. When a left hand uses the same scissors, the thumb naturally pulls the blades apart, creating a gap that folds and ruins the paper instead of cutting it. The left-hander learns to artificially torque their thumb, contorting their grip to force the scissor blades together, fighting the mechanics of the tool with every single cut. Move over to the modern office desk and look at the computer mouse, positioned faithfully on the right side of the keyboard with a short, stubbornly restrictive cable. The ergonomic curves fit the right palm perfectly, while the primary click button rests naturally under the right index finger, ready for action. The left-hander must reach across their body, drag the mouse to the other side, and mentally reverse the mapping of the buttons, just to navigate a digital screen. They live in a state of constant low-level translation, adjusting their posture, their grip, and their mind to accommodate a world that refuses to accommodate them. These aren't malicious designs engineered by evil architects. They're just the inevitable result of a majority building a world entirely in its own image. But these tiny, everyday frustrations culminate and amplify into real physical pain when we look at the most important fundamental act of human history, the act of writing. The cramped physical discomfort of the classroom desk escalates, taking us into the high-stakes, dangerous environments of the industrial workshop. The friction of the everyday world turns from a minor annoyance into a serious threat to the physical safety of the 10%. The foundational scripts of Western civilization, including English, French, and Spanish, flow uniformly from the left side of the page to the right. A right-handed person pulls their pen across the paper, their hand safely trailing behind the wet ink, leaving a clean, undisturbed trail of words. A left-handed person pushes the pen blindly into the sentence, their hand dragging over the freshly written letters, creating a mess of smeared ink and graphite. To survive this linguistic geography, the left-hander develops the iconic hooked hand posture, curling their wrist sharply over the top of the line. This awkward, painful contortion keeps the palm away from the ink, but it places immense, unnatural strain on the tendons of the wrist and forearm. Walk into a university lecture hall and look at the single-piece school desks, featuring a tiny wooden writing surface attached exclusively to the right armrest. The right-hander leans comfortably onto the support, taking notes for hours, while the left-hander twists their spine, hovering their arm over empty air, causing chronic back and neck strain. Move into the rigid, formal world of the classical orchestra, where the standardization of the violins demands unwavering visual conformity. The conductor forces the left-handed musicians to play right-handed, citing the fear that their bowing arms would collide with their neighbours in the tightly packed string section. But the discomfort of the lecture hall and the orchestra pit pales in comparison to the lethal bias engineered into modern power tools. Listen to the harsh, terrifying whine of a circular saw spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, slicing through thick wood in a dusty garage. The manufacturer places the safety kill switch exactly where a right thumb can reach it in a fraction of a second when a disaster occurs. When a left-hander operates that same saw, the safety switch sits completely out of reach, buried on the wrong side of the heavy plastic housing. The woodshop floor lies covered in sawdust, hiding the silent dangers that lurk in the design of the heavy machinery. The angle grinders, the drill presses, and the heavy pneumatic nail guns all feature grips and trigger safeties contoured perfectly for the right-handed worker. The left-hander adapts out of necessity, crossing their arms awkwardly to operate the levers or forcing their non-dominant right hand to handle dangerous precision tasks. This forced adaptation leads to fatigue, and fatigue in the presence of industrial power tools leads directly to the emergency room. Statistics gathered from trauma centers reveal the grim reality of this industrial bias, showing that left-handers suffer a higher rate of tool-related accidents simply because the off switch remains out of reach. If the saw kicks back, the left-hander can't stop the blade, increasing the risk of a catastrophic accident purely because of the tool's biased geometry. Chainsaws blow hot exhaust and throw sharp wooden chips exclusively to the right side, directly into the eyes and face of a left-handed lumberjack holding the rear handle. The machinery of the modern world expects a right-handed operator, treating the left-handed worker as a statistical anomaly, not worth the financial cost of a manufacturing redesign. Growing up bilingual in this dangerous motor space forces a constant, exhausting translation of risk and movement just to survive the average workday. The left-hander must remain hyper-vigilant, navigating a world of spinning steel blades and hot engines built by engineers who never once considered their existence. How has the modern market slowly started to recognize this struggle? And what does the ancient wisdom of biology have to say about this constant tension? The danger of the industrial workshop fades, replaced by the profound emotional relief of stepping into a quiet space that finally understands your body. We walk off the busy street and push open the door of a specialty shop, a sanctuary built exclusively for the 10%. Listen to the deeply satisfying, perfectly smooth slice of left-handed scissors gliding effortlessly through a thick sheet of construction paper. The shelves hold spiral notebooks bound tightly on the right side, allowing the wrist to rest flat and comfortable on the smooth paper. You find manual can openers that twist in the proper direction, computer mice molded for the left palm, and fountain pens with nibs ground to the perfect reversed angle. The customer in the specialty shop picks up a left-handed corkscrew, marveling at the simple, intuitive twist of the wrist that finally works without a fight. They try on a left-handed watch, with the winding crown positioned perfectly on the left side of the face, accessible to the thumb without reaching over the dial. These tools offer a brief, powerful glimpse into an alternate reality, a world where the dominant paradigm shifts and the minority sets the rules. This retail environment validates their struggle, proving that their awkwardness was never a personal failure, but merely a conflict of geometric design. For the first time, the left-hander experiences the invisible luxury that the right-hander takes for granted every single day of their life. They step into a mirrored world, a temporary haven where the friction disappears, and the physical tools feel like natural extensions of the arm. This small retail oasis represents a broader, undeniable truth about the nature of human existence and the intelligence of evolution. The biological world doesn't operate on simple concepts of right and wrong. It operates on a brilliant calculating system known as balanced polymorphism. This genetic principle explains why nature preserves certain traits that seem disadvantageous, keeping them locked in the population as an evolutionary insurance policy. It reminds us that biology constantly experiments, running 1 million simultaneous trials to find the perfect balance of traits necessary for the survival of the tribe. Look at the complex medical data surrounding sickle cell disease and its profound, intricate relationship with malaria in the tropical regions of Africa. If a child inherits 2 copies of the sickle cell gene, they suffer from a painful, debilitating disease that constantly threatens their daily life. But if they inherit only 1 single copy of the gene, they don't get the disease, and instead gain a massive, life-saving biological resistance to the malaria parasite. The benefits of that resistance outweigh the tragic costs of the disease, so evolution preserves the gene, keeping it perfectly balanced within the human population. We see the exact same biological mathematics at play when we look at the strange, sudden mutation of adult lactose tolerance or the beautiful emergence of blue eyes in the dark. Evolution keeps these traits alive because they provide a specific, highly contextual advantage that ensures the long-term survival of the greater human species. Left-handedness functions as the ultimate example of this balanced polymorphism, an ancient unbroken truce struck between the costs of physical friction and the profound benefits of neurological flexibility. The brain accepts the heavy daily tax of living in a right-handed world in exchange for the divergent thinking, the rapid stroke recovery, and the lethal combat advantage. The 10% isn't a mistake in the genetic code, a random glitch in the biological matrix, or a sad failure of human development. It is a calculated, brilliant evolutionary strategy, a resilient, necessary thread woven deliberately into the sprawling fabric of our DNA. The walls of the specialty shop fade away, expanding out into a vast, cosmic, deeply comforting space that holds the entirety of human history. We travel back 30,000 years, standing on an ancient, windswept savanna under a canopy of bright, uncharted stars. Listen to the gentle, slowing rhythm of a human heartbeat settling into the peace of sleep, blending seamlessly with the whisper of wind moving through the tall grass. You watch a small tribe of 50 people huddled around the warmth of a fire, trying to survive the terrors of the prehistoric night. Inside this fragile, vital circle of humanity, 5 people hold their spears in their left hands, watching the shadows with a different perspective. The stars slowly rotate above the savanna, marking the passage of deep time as the tribe settles into the dirt, their breathing synchronizing with the pulse of the earth. You belong to this massive, unbroken chain of survival, your own hands tracing a direct lineage back to those figures standing guard in the prehistoric chill. The right-handers provided the steady, reliable foundation, building the tools and holding the lines, while the left-handers provided the spark of necessary chaos. They saw the alternate routes through the mountains, invented the strange new tools, and broke the enemy ranks with their unpredictable strikes. These 5 individuals seed the tribe with the unpredictability, the divergent thinking, and the combat flexibility necessary to outsmart the predators waiting in the dark. The grand, sprawling paradox of the monastery, the biological mystery that puzzled the monks and the geneticists alike, finally resolves itself in the warm light of the fire. Evolution doesn't aim for a rigid, robotic uniformity. It aims for a chaotic, beautiful flexibility that can weather any catastrophic storm the universe throws at the planet. Variation is not a biological weakness. It is the ultimate, undeniable survival strategy, the secret weapon that allowed our resilient ancestors to walk out of the freezing ice age. As the modern world finally sheds the last lingering remnants of Victorian persecution and medieval stigma, we might see the visible rates of left-handedness rise slightly in the future, but the mathematical anchor of the 10% will always remain, held firmly in place by the ancient, unbreakable laws of balance, violence, and biology. Left-handedness stands as a quiet, enduring resistance against the overwhelming societal pressure to conform, a biological testament to the sheer power of seeing the world differently. As the glowing embers of the fire burn down to ash, casting a soft, warm glow across your face, allow your busy mind to drift away from the statistics and the history. Feel the tight tension leaving your shoulders, the weight of the long day dissolving into the quiet, enveloping comfort of your dark room. We are all the successful survivors of 1,000,000 ancient battles, carrying the triumphant blueprints of our ancestors inside the complex microscopic wiring of our resting minds. Tell me, as the heavy, comforting pull of sleep approaches, what hand do you naturally favor, and where in this vast, beautiful world are you listening from tonight? Leave your quiet, whispered answer in the comments below, placing a small mark of your own unique existence in the grand, rolling mathematics of humanity. If this wandering journey through the history of the human mind brought you peace, consider leaving a gentle like and softly subscribe to join us for our next exploration. Let the distant sounds of the ancient savannah carry you away into a deep restorative sleep, knowing that your unique differences are exactly what helped humanity survive. Good night, sleep well, and let the gentle, steady rhythm of your own beating heart guide you safely into the quiet, peaceful embrace of the dark.